It's difficult to distill a life into a few words and minutes, and I'm thankful that mine are not the only words here today. There are many of you that have known Grandpa longer and perhaps better, but he was a constant and much loved presence for my entire life. So I am honored to write these words, but how best to sum up that presence? Cleaning up his apartment, I packed away many of his things and asked myself, is this something that reminded me of Grandpa? These dishes, these towels, this cup? To be honest, almost nothing did. We had a good laugh at a few hats, were awed by some Russian rubles from over 100 years ago. But trying to recall Grandpa through these things brought nothing. Thankfully, I have decades of memories to keep him alive a while longer. In these memories, 3 things stand out and have, accurately or not, woven their way into each of them. First is the hug. This was the way he said hello and goodbye every time we met. To my child's eyes, it was this bone-crushing hug that made him one of the biggest, strongest people I knew, almost a giant. These hugs were a welcome home. They were a refuge when it was needed, and they were a way to say, I'm waiting with open arms for when you come back. The second, for lack of a better word, is fellowship. Often in these last 23 months on his own, Grandpa spoke of his loneliness, though at times it sounded like his social calendar was fuller than my own. In his apartment, I found visitor books in which Grandma had meticulously written down every visitor's name and whether they had stopped by for a coffee, lunch, or dinner. There were names for almost every other day some weeks. In my experience, you were treated to one of Grandma's home-cooked meals, and then Grandpa would get down to his side of business, which was to talk the latest in politics or books, current events in life or church. As a kid, this was never my favorite time of the meal, which I think Grandpa is here with me on this. It was always dessert, by the way. But as I grew older, this time spent catching up was as enjoyable as the meal itself. It was then Grandpa took the time to ask how life was going, what your plans were, to give advice or just a listening ear, whichever was needed. And if you weren't there for a meal, there was always a morning walk or 3 o'clock coffee, followed by some tile rummy, card games, or dominoes. Lastly is gratitude. In every prayer and grace, Grandpa always began by thanking God. Be it for family that had safely arrived for a visit, the start of another beautiful day, or those rare opportunities when we could all gather together. I feel like in these past few years, there became an almost urgency in the expressing of his gratitude. Why was his family chosen to leave Russia? How did he become so fortunate in his life, from having just enough food to eat in the early years of his marriage, to the fur coats and diamond rings that followed in the middle years? He didn't have the answer, and I think looking back over his life, the answers became less important. Being thankful and expressing his gratitude through actions and words is what became important. Grandpa will live on for me and continue to be a part of my life through these things, to always have open arms for those I love, to freely give the gift of time and attention, and sometimes instead of asking why, to simply say thank you. Thank you, Grandpa. I'll spend the rest of my life missing you, and look forward to the day we can meet again for a hug.